Hey everybody, this video is called The Rebellion of Sheba, and tonight we're going to continue our pass-through study here in the book of 2 Samuel, where we're going to be looking at the 20th chapter, and we're going to be looking at the rebellion of Sheba. So, chapter 20, verse 1 and 2 says, "And there happened to be there a rebel, whose name was Sheba, the son of Bichri, a Benjaminite, and he blew a trumpet and said, We have no share in David, nor do we have an inheritance in the son of Jesse. Every man to his tents, O Israel." So every man of Israel deserted David and followed Sheba, the son of Bichri, but the men of Judah from the Jordan as far as Jerusalem remained loyal to their king. And so there is really nothing known about this man named Sheba, and he must have been a person of considerable power and influence to raise such a sudden and extensive incitement. And he belonged to Saul's tribe, and that's where supporters of Saul's dynasty were still in the many. And he could see the disgust of the 10 tribes for Judah's presumption in the restoration. And we see that Sheba, he sought to overturn David's authority in Israel. In Sheba's declaration that the northern tribes had no part in David's realm was very similar to the words that are later used in the book of 1 Kings chapter 12 verse 16 when Israel seceded from the United Kingdom under Jeroboam. And once the 10 tribes withdrew, Judah was left alone to escort the king to Jerusalem. And it seemed that the disloyalty of the north continued as long as Sheba lived. And Sheba, he denied the king's sovereignty and he devalued the king's identity. And now David would have another civil war to deal with. And in the last video yesterday, the leaders of these same 10 tribes, they argued with the tribes of Judah over who honored David more, as you saw back in verse 40 through 43. And their response to Sheba's rebellion shows their desire to honor David, and it had nothing to do with honoring him truly, but exalting themselves. And the desertion of the 10 tribes was distressing, but the loyalty of the men of Judah was wonderful. And in verse 3 it says, "Now David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 women, his concubines, whom he had left to keep the house. And he put them in seclusion and supported them, but he did not go into them, so they were shut up to the day of their death, living in widowhood." And so verse 3 is a little hard to swallow here. But we see that David, he returns to Jerusalem, and he confined his concubines to a life of abstinence because of their sexual relations with Absalom back in chapter 16, verse 20 through 22. And as we know from chapter 16, that's when David's son Absalom had raped them. And David, he set them aside as unfortunate victims of the sins of Absalom. In verse 4 and 5 it says, "And the king said to Amasa, Assemble the men of Judah for me within 3 days, and present here yourself. So Amasa went to assemble the men of Judah, but he delayed longer than the set time which David had appointed him. And David said to Abishai, Now Sheba the son of Bichri will do more harm than Absalom. Take your Lord's servants and pursue him, lest he find for himself fortified cities and escape us." So Joab's men with the Cherethites, the Pelethites, and the almighty men went out after him. And they went out of Jerusalem to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. And so when Amasa failed to follow David's orders, David did not reinstate Joab as his former general who had killed Absalom. And we know that Joab, he killed Absalom against King David's orders. But we see that he appoints Joab's brother Abishai as the commander of the forces. And Joab's men in verse 7, Abishai was to take the army of Joab to pursue the rebel leader. And Joab went also, and he determined to take vengeance on his rival Amasa. And we're going to see next week in chapter 23 of these men listed under verse 7. In Joab, we see that he is the field commander of the troops. In verses 8 through 10, it says, Then they were at a large stone, which is in Gibeon. Amasa came before them. Now Joab was dressed in battle armor. On it was a belt with a sword fastened in its sheath at the hips, and he was going forward, and it fell out. Then Joab said to Amasa, Are you in health, my brother? And Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. But Amasa did not notice the sword that was in Joab's hand, and he struck him with it in the stomach, and his entrails poured out on the ground, and he did not strike him again. Then he died. Then Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued Sheba, the son of Bichri. So we see a little bit of more graphic details in the text here. And having collected some forces, we see that he marched rapidly, and he came first to Gibeon, therefore assuming the role of commander. And it's possible that Joab purposely let the sword fall from its sheath as he approached Amasa, in order that stooping, as if to pick up the accidental fallen weapon. And he might salute the new general with the sword already in hand without generating any suspicion of his intent. And he used this ploy to gain the position to stab the new commander, whom he considered as overthrowing his post. And Joab present with his men seized Amasa by the beard with his right hand, apparently to give the kiss of greeting. And instead of his left hand, he thrust his sword into Amasa's stomach. And when I think of him holding the beard, I think of today, if you tried to hold somebody's beard the way he did, you're probably going to get punched in the face, and rightfully so. And, one of the people with the coolest beards today, I think, personally, is Jeff Durbin. And, he knows martial arts. You try to pull Jeff Durbin by the beard, and I'm guaranteeing you're going to get a little bit of martial arts taste to you. But at this time, this was considered a friendly gesture among these people. And Joab approached Amasa cunningly and deceptively. And British theologian Adam Clarke held to the belief that Amasa did not die immediately, as he personally knew instances of people who lived several hours after their bowels have been shed out. And I don't really want to think about that. I know it's not a very holiday look to this chapter today. But verse 11 through 14 says, Meanwhile, one of Joab's men stood near Amasa and said, Whoever favors Joab, and whoever is for David, follow Joab. But Amasa wallowed in his blood in the middle of the highway. And when the men saw that all the people stood still, he moved Amasa from the highway to the field and threw a garment over him. When he saw that everyone who came up upon him halted. When he was removed from the highway, all the people went on after Joab to pursue Sheba, the son of Bichri. And he went through all the tribes of Israel to Abel and Beth Machah and all the Berites. So they gathered together and also went after Sheba. So verse 11 through 14, we see that Joab was reinstated as commander of David's army by his troops. And we see a striking illustration of Joab's influence over the army, that he could murder the commander whom David had chosen, and a killing right before their eyes. And they would follow him unanimously as their leader in pursuit of Sheba. And Abel Beth Makkah was approximately 25 miles north of the Sea of Galilee and 4 miles west of the city of Dan. And in chapter 20, verse 15 through 22, says, Then they came and besieged them in Abel of Beth of Machah, and they cast up a siege mound against the city, and it stood by the rampart. And all the people who were with Joab battered the wall to throw it down. Then a wise woman cried out from the city, Here, here, please say to Joab, Come near by, that I may speak with you. And he had to come near to her. The woman said, Are you Joab? And he answered, I am. Then she said to him, Hear the words of your maidservant. He answered, I am listening. So she spoke, saying, They used to talk in former times, saying, They shall surely seek guidance at Abel, so that they would end disputes. I am among the peaceable and faithful in Israel. You seek to destroy a city and a mother in Israel. Why would you swallow up the inheritance of the Lord? And Joab answered and said, Far be it from me that I should swallow up and destroy. That is not so, but a man from the mountain of Ephraim, Sheba the son of Bichri, by name, has raised up his hand against the king, against David. Deliver him only, and I will depart from the city. So the woman said to Joab, Watch, his head will be thrown to you over the wall. Then the woman in her wisdom went to all the people, and they cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and threw it out to Joab. And he blew the trumpet and withdrew from the city, every man to his tent. So Joab returned to the king of Jerusalem. And so, verse 15 through 22, this woman was probably a very important judge in the city and was probably making an appeal based on the laws of warfare that we studied back in the month of April when we went through the book of Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 10. And that required the assaulting army to offer peace before making war. And we see that this woman pleads for Joab to take the city if they wanted peace, and therefore to avert this war. And a mother in Israel is a reference to a specially honored city or a recognized capital of the region. And the inheritance of the Lord, it refers to the land of Israel. And Joab was a patriot at heart who, on taking the leader of the insurrection, was ready to go with further bloodshed. And we see that this woman eagerly responded with the promise of Sheba's head. And the mountains of Ephraim was a very large, partially forested plateau that extended into the tribal territory of Benjamin from the north. And David could not get rid of Joab, although he hated him. And he had to ignore the murder of Amasa and recognize Joab as the army commander. And while the rebellion of Sheba ended, the division between Judah and the other 11 tribes of Israel remained. And verse 23 through 26, to wrap up the chapter, says, And Joab was all over the army of Israel. Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, was over the Cherethites and the Pelethites. Adoram was in charge of revenue. Jehoshaphat, the son of Helud, was recorder. Sheva was scribe. Zadok and Abiathar were the priests. And Ira, the Jerite, was a chief minister under David. And so this list is very similar to what we looked at about a month ago in chapter 8, verse 15 through 18. And Adoram was in charge of the revenue, hard labor that was imposed on the conquered peoples. And later in the book of 1 Kings 4:28, he is known as Adoniram. And Adoram oversaw the forced labor of such projects as the building of highways and temples and houses. In Sheva, he replaced Seraiah as David's secretary, and Ira was David's royal advisor. So to wrap up today's chapter, we look at Sheba's rebellion over his division that he brought. And may we not be like Sheba, being a divisive person. And I want to go over to Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1 through 4. And it says, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling you were called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long suffering, bearing one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called, in one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism. So we don't make unity of the Spirit, we keep the unity of the Spirit. And David, we saw David put away the woman that his son violated. And the sad fate of David's 10 concubines is an example that we should not take lightly. It is a direct picture of how our sin has often horrible effects on others. You know, when we commit sins, your sins don't only affect you, they will affect those around you that you love. And we see that his concubine suffered because of Absalom's sin and ultimately David's sin. And we saw that David tell Amasa to marshal an army to deal with Sheba's rebellion. And we saw that David, he grew tired of waiting and he sends his royal guard. And then we see that Joab used deception to murder Amasa. And we saw that Joab goes on to take command of the troops loyal to David. And then we see finally the end of Sheba's rebellion. But at the end, we see that David's second administration becomes into play. And that's going to wrap up today's video. We'll see you next on Thursday as we're going to be looking at David avenging the Gibeonites. So I hope you have a great rest of your evening. God bless. We'll see you Thursday night.